The Xelthar Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, not through diplomacy, not through alliances, but through absolute terror. Their power rested upon a single devastating technology: the hydro weapons, a liquid so lethal that a single drop could dissolve organic matter in seconds, leaving behind nothing but vapor. No civilization had dared to resist once they saw what it could do. Worlds surrendered before the war even began, knowing that defiance meant extinction. The Dominion never had to fight. They only had to threaten. And that was enough. Until now. When humanity entered the galactic stage, the Dominion had no reason to see them as a threat. They were a new species, technologically advanced, but far from the military might of the Xelthar. A race still expanding into the stars, naive in their understanding of how the galaxy truly worked. Like many before them, the Dominion expected the humans to fall in line, to recognize that resistance was not an option. The ultimatum was sent, a simple message broadcast to every human colony and their homeworld: join the Dominion as subjects or face annihilation. The humans' response was unexpected. They requested a meeting. Not a surrender, not an offer of negotiation, but a simple request. We would like to see it. No species had ever dared to ask such a thing before. Normally, a single demonstration was enough to send fear rippling through the galaxy. But the humans were different. They were calm, almost curious, as if the hydro weapons were some new experiment rather than an existential threat. The Xelthar High Council, amused by this foolish bravery, agreed. They gathered the representatives of various civilizations in a grand assembly aboard one of their largest dreadnoughts, a behemoth that hovered in the void between stars. The demonstration would serve as a final reminder of the Dominion's power. The chamber was vast, filled with towering figures of alien species, all watching in tense silence. A Xelthar scientist stepped forward, holding a vial of shimmering dark blue liquid, the hydro weapon. In a single motion, he poured a few drops onto a reinforced steel table. The metal hissed, then vanished. The liquid did not burn, nor did it leave residue. It simply erased matter from existence. Gasps filled the room, whispers of fear passing between the gathered diplomats. This was what had crushed entire civilizations without a single battle. This was why the Dominion ruled the galaxy. And yet, amidst the fear and murmurs, the humans remained silent. Then one of them, Captain Reynolds, stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his expression unreadable as he studied the now empty space where the steel had been. He glanced at the scientist, then at the vial in the Xelthar's hand. Without hesitation, he reached out and took it. The chamber fell deathly still. Reynolds held the vial up, tilting it slightly as the liquid swirled inside. He examined it the way a man might examine an unfamiliar drink at a bar, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his lips. The Xelthar scientist, stunned by the audacity, opened his mouth to object. But before he could speak, Reynolds did something unthinkable. He unsealed the vial and drank it. The entire room erupted into chaos. Aliens recoiled in horror. Some leaped back, expecting the human to disintegrate where he stood. The Xelthar High Council members bolted upright, unable to process what had just happened. Their most feared weapon, the very foundation of their dominance, consumed like water. Seconds passed. Reynolds licked his lips, smacked them once as if tasting the aftereffects, and then casually muttered, "Tastes like lemon." The silence that followed was heavier than the void itself. No one spoke. No one moved. The Dominion's greatest secret weapon, the force that had held the galaxy in fear for centuries, had just been neutralized in the most casual way imaginable. The Xelthar scientist was visibly shaking now, his fingers twitching as he fumbled for an explanation. He turned desperately to the High Council members, searching for some rationalization. But there was none. The humans exchanged amused glances, as if they had expected this outcome all along. They hadn't come here to bow in fear. They had come here to test the weapon. And now they knew it was useless against them. Panic rippled through the HFY ranks. How? How could this be? The hydro weapons had been engineered to break down organic matter at a molecular level. There was no known species that could survive contact, let alone consume it. The scientists scrambled to run scans on Reynolds, desperate for answers. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the Dominion. Human biology was unlike anything they had encountered. Their cells did not react to the hydro liquid the way other species did. Instead of breaking down, their bodies absorbed it. Their internal chemistry neutralized the weapon entirely, rendering it inert. What had once been the Dominion's deadliest tool had become nothing more than a mildly tangy beverage to the very species they had sought to conquer. And worse, it made humans stronger. The liquid, once a symbol of destruction, was now a resource. The humans weren't just immune, they were enhanced by it. Their metabolism adapted, utilizing the energy from the chemical breakdown of the liquid to fuel their endurance, their strength, their speed. What had been a weapon against others was now an advantage for humans alone. Word spread across the galaxy at an unstoppable speed. The Dominion, once feared, was now a laughingstock. Their enemies, once too terrified to fight back, now rose in rebellion. Their fleets found themselves facing enemies who no longer feared them. The hydro weapons, once the ultimate deterrent, had become a joke. And leading the charge were the humans. Zelthar warships fell as rebels coated their blades in hydro liquid, no longer fearing their own weapons. Human soldiers drank hydro-infused rations before battle, emerging faster, stronger, more resilient than before. The Dominion collapsed within weeks. Their rulers, once untouchable, now begged for mercy at the feet of those they had tried to subjugate. At the final peace negotiation, Captain Reynolds sat at the head of the table, a bottle of hydro liquid in his hand. He swirled it lazily, meeting the fearful eyes of the remaining HFY leaders. The air was thick with tension, the weight of history pressing down on the room. Then, with a casual grin, he took another sip. "Now," he said, leaning forward, "let's talk about the new order of things." And across the galaxy, every species understood one thing: humanity had changed everything. The Galactic Council chamber was silent, filled with representatives of 100 different species, all gathered to witness a moment that would reshape the balance of power in the universe. At the center of the massive hall stood Supreme Commander Vornak of the HFY Dominion, a towering figure with dark metallic skin and piercing red eyes. Behind him, flanked by heavily armed guards, stood a display case containing the most dangerous weapon ever created, the Oblivion Core, a device so powerful that it could wipe out an entire planet with a single detonation, leaving nothing but an empty void where life once thrived. The HFY Dominion had ruled through fear for centuries, but now, after countless wars and rebellions, their grip on the galaxy was weakening. The Galactic Council had forced them to negotiate peace, and to secure their dominance, the HFY planned to remind the other species why they were to be feared. They had arranged this demonstration as a warning, a show of strength meant to silence any thoughts of resistance. The message was clear: the Dominion could still destroy anyone who defied them. Among the gathered species, the humans stood near the back, watching carefully. Unlike the others, they did not tremble in fear. They had not bowed to the HFY's threats, and their refusal to submit had already made them enemies of the Dominion. The leader of the human delegation, Commander Elias Carter, stood with arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes fixed on the stage. He had seen enough of these so-called demonstrations to know they always ended the same way, with the HFY reveling in their power while everyone else cowered. But today, something felt different. Vornak stepped forward, his voice booming across the chamber. For centuries, the Dominion has been the supreme force in this galaxy. We have allowed this council to exist, permitted weaker species to thrive under our rule. But let there be no mistake, we remain unmatched. The Oblivion Core is proof of our power. And today, we shall demonstrate its might. A nervous murmur spread through the crowd as Selvari scientists moved to activate the device. The demonstration was meant to be controlled. A simulated explosion contained within an energy field, enough to show the devastation without harming the station or its occupants. The calculations had been checked 100 times. Nothing could go wrong. And yet, something did. The moment the core was activated, a deep, unnatural hum filled the air. The display case flickered, its protective shielding collapsing in an instant. The scientists froze, their expressions shifting from confidence to horror. The energy field meant to contain the blast failed. Sparks erupted from the console. The hum grew louder, turning into a deafening screech. The Oblivion core was no longer stable. It was overloading. Panic spread like wildfire. The delegates leaped from their seats, some rushing for the exits, others frozen in terror. The Selvari guards scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The energy readings on the screens spiked into the red zone. If the core detonated, it wouldn't just destroy the chamber, it would wipe out the entire station, and everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. Vornak shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The scientists desperately tried to shut the device down, but their controls were unresponsive. Their ultimate weapon, the thing they had built to instill fear, was now out of their control. And then, amidst the panic, a single voice cut through the noise. "Get back." Carter's voice was firm, commanding. He pushed forward, shoving aside a Selvari guard as he rushed toward the console. His team followed without hesitation. Unlike the others, they weren't running. They were moving toward the danger. A Selvari scientist grabbed Carter's arm. "You don't understand. The core is collapsing into itself. The energy is building up. It will detonate in less than 2 minutes." "Then we better stop it in 1." Carter shot back. His team was already in motion. Lieutenant Park pulled open the side panel of the control console, her fingers flying over the circuits. Their failsafe system is locked behind 3 layers of encryption. She called out, "I can break it, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Carter muttered. His eyes darted across the chaotic scene before locking onto the core itself. The device was pulsing violently, tendrils of energy arcing outward. It wasn't just charging, it was seeking something. It was looking for an output, a way to release its unstable energy. And if it didn't find one soon, Carter made a split-second decision. "Park, forget the failsafe. Reroute the energy into the station's power grid." "Are you insane? That much energy will overload the grid. Better the grid than us. Do it." Park hesitated for only a second before her hands moved again, inputting commands faster than the Selvari could even comprehend. The station's lights flickered wildly as raw energy surged through the systems, redirecting the deadly buildup away from the core. The readings on the monitors dropped slightly, but not enough. "Still too much," Park shouted. "We need another output." Carter's mind raced. He looked around, searching for anything that could act as a secondary energy sink. Then his eyes landed on the Dominion's fleet visible through the massive chamber windows, warships lined up in perfect formation outside. "Cortez," he barked, "can you override the docking clamps on their ships?" The engineer's eyes widened. "You're not seriously thinking. Can you or not?" Cortez cursed under his breath, but got to work. Within seconds, the clamps released, and the docking ports opened. Carter turned to Park. "Now, redirect the remaining charge into those ships." Park hit the final command. The core shuddered violently. Then, all at once, the energy discharge. A blinding flash filled the chamber as a surge of power leaped from the core, shooting out through the open docking ports. The Selvari warships, still locked in formation, took the full blast. The first ship erupted in a chain reaction, its systems frying instantly. The second followed. Then the third. Within moments, half the fleet was crippled. The chamber was filled with stunned silence. The Oblivion core, once moments away from destroying everyone, now sat inactive. The emergency shutdown had worked, But in doing so, the humans had just disabled the Dominion's strongest fleet, without firing a single shot. Vornak, still recovering from the shock, turned to Carter, his red eyes burning with fury. You planned this," he accused. "This was sabotage." Carter shook his head, a smirk forming on his lips. "No, Supreme Commander, this was you demonstrating your weapon. You just weren't expecting the demonstration to go so wrong." The gathered species, once paralyzed by fear, erupted in laughter. That Selvari Dominion, feared for centuries, had just humiliated themselves in front of the entire galaxy. The demonstration that was meant to ensure their rule had instead shattered it. And as Carter walked away, he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had just changed forever. The Galactic Tribunal's chamber was silent, yet the tension in the air was suffocating. The room was filled with representatives of hundreds of species, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright terror. The source of their horror stood at the center of the chamber, a single human. Captain Elias Carter, battle-worn and calm, stood with his hands behind his back, his sharp blue eyes scanning the gathered crowd. He was not nervous. He was not afraid. He was here to speak the truth, no matter how impossible it seemed. The tribunal had been called to address an incident that defied all logic. The Ralvik Empire, an ancient and powerful race that had ruled for over 20,000 years, had been wiped out. Not by war, not by plague, but by something far worse, something unnatural. Entire planets had gone silent. Space stations had been found empty, as if the population had simply vanished. The Ralvik, once arrogant and untouchable, were now nothing more than a ghostly memory. And the only survivor, the only one who had seen what truly happened, was Elias Carter. A Selvari representative, his dark scales reflecting the dim light, leaned forward. His voice was sharp, accusing. "Captain Carter, you were found drifting near the Ralvik homeworld. You are the only known survivor. Tell us, what did you see? What destroyed them?" Carter took a slow breath. He knew that what he was about to say would change everything. He had replayed the events in his mind 1,000 times, trying to find another explanation. Something logical, something normal. But there was no other explanation, only the unthinkable truth. "It started with the disappearances," he began, his voice steady. "Not just on one planet, but across their entire empire. At first, no one noticed. A few ships went missing. Space stations lost contact. It was subtle. Then, entire colonies went dark. No distress signals, no wreckage, just silence. A murmur spread through the chamber. Many had heard the rumors, but none had dared to believe them. "I was sent as part of an Allied investigation fleet," Carter continued. "We arrived at the outer colonies, expecting to find signs of an invasion, maybe some kind of weapon. But there was nothing. No bodies, no damage. The cities were intact. Food was still on the tables. Ships were still in the docks. It was as if they had just stepped away for a moment and never came back." He paused, letting his words settle. Across the room, nervous glances were exchanged. The idea of an enemy that could take an entire species without a fight was terrifying. "We pushed deeper," Carter said. "We made it to their core worlds. That's when we saw it. A representative from the Zenari Alliance, a creature with translucent skin, leaned forward. Saw what?" Carter's hands clenched at his sides. Even now, he struggled to put it into words. "We saw them," he said at last. "The Ralvik. They were there, standing, staring, frozen, millions of them, in their streets, in their homes, as if they had been stopped in time. But they weren't dead. They weren't alive either. They were empty." A horrified whisper ran through the chamber. The Selvari representative growled. "Explain." Carter met his gaze. Their bodies were there, but their minds were gone. Their souls, their consciousness, vanished, as if something had reached into them and taken everything. A cold shiver ran through the room. Species that had ruled the stars for millennia looked at each other with growing dread. The representative from the Korlak Dominion, a race known for their brutal conquests, scoffed. "This is absurd. No force in the universe can do that. You are lying, human." Carter's expression darkened. "I wish I was." Silence fell once more. Then, slowly, the speaker of the tribunal, an elder being with golden eyes that had seen thousands of years, spoke. "You are suggesting that something out there feeds on minds." Carter exhaled sharply. "Not just minds. Souls. I saw it happen. I watched as my own crew began to change. First, they heard whispers. Then they forgot things, small at first. Their names, their families. Then they forgot how to move, how to breathe. And then they were gone. Their bodies stood there, but they were empty, just like the Ralvik. The chamber was dead silent. Someone finally spoke. "What is it? What did this?" Carter's jaw tightened. "I don't know. We never saw it, never fought it. It didn't come with warships or weapons. It didn't break through our shields. It was just there, an invisible force, spreading through space, consuming everything in its path." The speaker of the tribunal looked around the chamber. "And yet, you survived." Carter hesitated. This was the part he had dreaded, the part that terrified him the most. "I survived," he said slowly, "because I was the only one left. The last mind to take." He swallowed. "And it spoke to me." The room erupted in shouts of disbelief. "You're lying," the Korlak representative roared. "This is madness." Another delegate yelled. Carter slammed his fist on the podium, silencing them all. His voice was low, but the weight of his words shook the room. "It told me something before it let me go." He looked at them, his expression unreadable. It said, "Not yet." A chill ran through the chamber. Not yet. Not yet. It wasn't done. It wasn't finished. And it was still out there. For the first time in history, the Galactic Tribunal, the rulers of the known universe, felt fear. The battlefield was supposed to be a formality. The HFY Dominion had invaded countless worlds before, and every time, they had crushed their enemies within days. Their technology was superior, their armies vast, and their war machines unstoppable. The High Command had declared that humanity would fall just as easily. But now, standing on the ruined plains of Earth, watching the horror unfold before them, the HFY generals realized they had made a terrible mistake. It had started like every other conquest. The HFY fleet descended upon Earth, obliterating orbital defenses and crippling communication networks within hours. Their ground forces had marched forward with confidence, overwhelming cities, cutting through resistance like a blade through air. The first week had been a slaughter. Billions of humans, reduced to scattered survivors hiding in the shadows. The HFY believed the war was over. They were wrong. The turning point came without warning. The HFY scouts reported human activity deep in the ruins of their cities, more than there should have been. The humans weren't just surviving. They were moving, coordinating, learning. Then the real nightmare began. HFY soldiers started disappearing. Not in battle, not from explosions, but in silence. Patrols sent into the ruined streets never returned. Entire platoons vanished without a single shot fired. At first, the commanders dismissed it as human desperation, but then they found the bodies. HFY warriors, their armor shattered, their weapons untouched. Some were found with bare hands wrapped around their throats, crushed by impossible force. Others had expressions frozen in sheer terror, their eyes empty, as if they had seen something that shattered their very minds. There were no scorch marks, no gunfire wounds, only raw, brutal violence. The HFY, a species that had never known fear, began to feel it creeping into their bones. They had expected a weak, disorganized resistance. Instead, they had awakened something else, something primal. The humans no longer fought for victory. They fought for revenge. A desperate order came from the HFY High Command. Find the humans. Crush them. End this. Squads were deployed in every city, hunting the survivors. But the humans did not hide. They hunted back. HFY soldiers began hearing strange sounds in the darkness. Whispers, footsteps, movement in the shadows. The moment they turned to investigate, something struck. Fast, precise, lethal. Blades found the weak spots in their armor. Bullets struck the soft flesh between their exoskeletal plating. Hands wrapped around their throats and squeezed until their bodies collapsed in spasms. The humans did not fight like soldiers anymore. They fought like predators. Panic spread through the HFY ranks. They had the numbers, they had the firepower, but none of it mattered if they couldn't even see their enemy. The humans moved in silence, attacked in the dark, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The HFY had been the hunters once. Now, they were the prey. One by one, the great war machines of the HFY fell. Entire armored divisions were found burning, their pilots missing. Command stations were infiltrated, officers found dead at their posts. Supply chains collapsed. Morale crumbled. The HFY had never experienced a war like this. The final blow came when their flagship, the Dominator, suddenly lost control. In the heart of their own warship, human infiltrators had bypassed security, disabled the engines, and planted explosives deep within its core. The alarms had barely started blaring when the entire ship detonated, a fireball of HFY arrogance and human defiance. Now, on the eve of their final retreat, the HFY generals stood in disbelief. They had arrived to conquer. Instead, they had been broken. Their soldiers refused to leave their barracks, terrified of what lurked outside. Their warships refused to land, afraid of the ghosts that now ruled Earth's streets. Humanity, battered and bloodied, had risen from the ashes of its own destruction. As the remaining HFY forces fled the planet, the humans watched them go. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction, but they had fought back with something that HFY could never understand: pure, relentless determination. And as the last HFY warship disappeared into the void, humanity knew the war wasn't over. No, this was just the beginning. The tables had turned, and now it was humanity's turn to strike. The Galactic Council Hall had never been so silent. Delegates from 100 different species sat frozen in their seats, their eyes locked onto the massive holographic display at the center of the chamber. The Terran fleets had arrived. Rows upon rows of warships, each one a titan of destruction, hovered just outside the Council's protected space. The humans had made their move, and now the galaxy held its breath. For centuries, the Council had been ruled by the great empires, the HFY Dominion, the Vorthan Confederacy, and the Zelquar Alliance. They had shaped the laws, controlled the economy, and dictated which species thrived and which suffered. Humanity, for the longest time, had been nothing more than an afterthought, a minor race on the edge of the galaxy, struggling to keep up with the old powers. The Council had once dismissed them as insignificant, too young, and too weak to challenge the established order. No one could have predicted what would happen next. Humanity did not crumble under the HFY invasion. They did not surrender, nor did they beg for mercy. Instead, they fought back with a fury that shook the stars. The war was brutal, relentless, and utterly devastating. The HFY fleets, once feared across the galaxy, were torn apart. The humans did not just defeat them, they annihilated them. The great HFY Dominion, an empire that had stood for over 10,000 years, no longer existed. And now, with their warships burning in the void, the humans had arrived at the Council's doorstep with a simple message: the old ways are over. A new order has begun. The Supreme Chancellor of the Council, a towering Vorthan with crimson scales and 6 golden eyes, rose from his seat, his voice trembling as he addressed the human delegation. Terrans, This show of force is unnecessary. The Council has always welcomed diplomacy, but his words rang hollow, and everyone in the chamber knew it. For years, the Council had ignored humanity's pleas for protection, turned a blind eye to the atrocities committed against them, and refused to acknowledge them as equals. And now, the humans had come to collect the debt. Admiral Elias Voss, the highest-ranking officer of the United Terran Fleet, stood before the Council with cold, unwavering eyes. Diplomacy, he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Was it diplomacy when the Excelthar glassed our colonies? Was it diplomacy when our cries for help were ignored? When we were left to die alone? His gaze swept across the alien leaders, each one too afraid to meet his eyes. No. The time for diplomacy ended when the first human world burned. The silence in the room was suffocating. Everyone knew what the humans wanted, but no one dared to say it. They had watched in horror as Terran forces dismantled the Excelthar war machine, as entire fleets were reduced to wreckage, as cities fell under the relentless march of human soldiers. And now, the survivors of that war, the very species who had once ruled over humanity, sat in the council chambers like frightened children. Elias took a step forward. The United Terran Federation will no longer be a spectator in galactic affairs. We are not here to ask for a seat at your table. He gestured toward the holographic display, where thousands of human warships loomed over the Council's homeworld. We are here to replace it. A Zelquar ambassador, his tentacles quivering with barely contained fear, finally spoke. You cannot be serious. You would dare overthrow the Council. Elias tilted his head slightly. Overthrow. He chuckled, but there was no humor in his voice. No, we do not need to overthrow anything. The Council has already failed. It failed to protect its members. It failed to stop the rise of tyrants. And it failed to understand that power does not belong to those who claim it, but to those who prove they deserve it. The delegates exchanged nervous glances. They had ruled unchallenged for thousands of years. But now, everything had changed. The humans had proven something no one had dared to believe, that the great powers of the galaxy were not untouchable, that even the mightiest empires could fall. That fear was no longer their weapon to wield, because now, humanity was the one who was feared. The Supreme Chancellor's voice was quiet when he spoke. What do you want? Elias took a slow breath before answering. A new order. One where no species is left to die. One where the strong do not prey upon the weak. His voice darkened. One where humanity will never again be seen as prey. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes like steel. From this moment on, the Galactic Council answers to the United Terran Federation. You will accept new laws. You will dismantle your corrupt trade agreements. And you will acknowledge humanity not as a mere participant in galactic affairs, but as its new leaders. A murmur of protest rose through the chamber, but none of the voices were strong enough to challenge him. They knew the truth. They could fight. They could resist. But that would mean war. And if there was one thing the last war had proven, it was this. No one could win against humanity. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the Supreme Chancellor lowered his head in submission. One by one, the other delegates followed. The Vorthans, the Zelquar, the remnants of the Excelthar. All of them bowed before the humans, before the warriors they had once ignored, before the species that had reshaped the galaxy through fire and blood. Elias exhaled slowly. It was done. Humanity had been dismissed, underestimated, and nearly wiped out, but they had risen from the ashes stronger than ever. They had turned the tide of war, shattered an empire. And now, they ruled. The old galactic order was dead. A new one had taken its place.